Took place over the weekend in London as protesters marched through the streets to voice their support for a referendum on any final Brexit deal. It was organised by the People's Vote campaign, which claims that 700,000 people turned out to lend their support. Let's listen to audio from the march to get a flavour of what it was like in the crowds.
That's the thing. We have not had an informed vote.
Brexit has turned into a fiasco.
People vote! We need a second vote to get us out of this mess!
What do we want? People's votes! When do we want it? Now!
No matter which side of the Brexit debate you're on, there's no denying that the aerial footage of the march was impressive, with the streets packed full of people as far as the eye could see, waving flags, banging drums, and many of them chanting, "Stop Brexit." Those behind the People's Vote march say this is a clear display of the will of the people. They say that the Brexit proposition has changed so much since we first voted for it that the public deserves a say on the final deal. However, others, including some prominent Remainers, disagree. Another referendum, they say, would subvert democracy. A few 100,000 people marching in London, while impressive, is nothing, they say, compared with the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU in the referendum 2 years ago. The people have already voted, they say, and they voted to leave. So just how significant was this protest? And will it make any difference? Do give me a call on 08000 288 291 or email vine@bbc.co.uk. Let's talk to Edwina Currie, the former Conservative minister, who was a prominent Remain campaigner, but doesn't believe the march should count for very much. Hello, Edwina. Good afternoon.
Hi, Vanessa.
And let's talk to Polly Ernest, who travelled all the way from Hereford to attend the march at the weekend with her 5 children. Hello, Polly.
Hello.
Well, let's start with you, Edwina. What do you make of this? 700,000 people? I mean, it's a fairly big deal, isn't it?
Well, with all due respect, it's only their claim that was 700,000 people. We should be able to spot fake news a mile off these days, and the police estimate is not going to be published for some time, if ever. So, and there were other people on Twitter that reckoned that by calculation it was about 200,000. It was a demo, Vanessa.
Mm-hmm.
It was a demo. That's what it was. That's what you and I used to call these things. And when you march on them, you feel fantastic. You're surrounded by people all screaming the same thing. And you think, oh, the government's got to listen. Can I remind everybody, 1 million people marched against the Iraq war. Governments actually don't have to take any notice at all. And I'm absolutely certain that that'll be the case this time.
On the other hand, many people think that we're meant to learn from the lessons of history. And so when you say many people, 1 million people marched against the Iraq war and no notice was taken, people don't necessarily think that was the right thing. I think they may feel, in retrospect, it was very much the wrong thing. And therefore, the government ought to take notice this time, not to ignore a demonstration.
Yeah, well, that's like trying to rewrite history with the benefit of hindsight. And you can't do that. We had a people's vote. I was a Remain campaigner, as you said. I went out campaigning. I do wish some of the people who were on that march had made sure that they were out campaigning and that they got people to come out and vote. A lot of them were from London, from Islington, from Camden, from Tower Hamlets. And do you know what? In those areas, the turnout was less than 2/3. And it was in other parts of the United Kingdom. Let's remind ourselves, the whole of England, apart from London, voted to leave. And in other parts of the country, the turnout was over 70%. The area where I live in now, in the High Peak in Derbyshire, the turnout was 75%, which was much higher than in the general election the year before. People felt strongly enough to come out and vote, and it's no good moaning now that you didn't like the result.
What about the idea that people didn't really realise what they were voting about? They hadn't been made properly aware of the implications of where Brexit was going to lead us, and it's only now that we see what might be the result that some people will want to revise their opinions. And of course, either way, they may want to vote in favour of Brexit when they didn't last time.
Well, and it can be the other way around. If there were a second vote, I would be voting to leave. I think the way the Brussels have behaved towards it and the disdain and the disrespect they've shown our Prime Minister has been an absolute disgrace and tends to reinforce some of the feeling. There was an intense debate. I mean, you and I spoke about this. We were on endlessly talking about it. I have no doubt that everybody realised, not least because 33 million people came out and voted on that day in June of 2016. So it does suggest that people were taking it very seriously, doing their homework. Much of the argument was a pitch of economic forecast against, which was dubbed the Project Pain and so on, and Project Fear rather, versus how people felt about our country, about its identity, about its position in the world. And in that sense, I think actually in many cases the leavers had a much clearer idea of what they were voting for.
But Edwina, if even you were somebody who knew what you were talking about and had done your research and steeped in political implications of everything, if you say you would change your mind now, how could you not be joining Polly and saying, now this is the people's chance for another people's vote? We didn't know what we were doing last time. This time we do, and we want the chance to change our minds if necessary.
Not least because if there were to be a second referendum, it would really create absolute chaos. I mean, it's bad enough with the result and the outcome of the one that we already had. I mean, what would they be voting for? Let's take on board that an awful lot of those people, Vanessa, just want to stop Brexit. That's what a lot of the posters were actually saying. But if you were to have a second vote, you would be voting, they say, on the final deal.
Yes.
Well, we haven't got a final deal yet. We may never have a final deal. It's the sort of thing where you tinker at the corners of this sort of thing for a very long time indeed. The shorter the better. But if they were to, if you put a deal, a complex proposition to the electorate in a simple referendum, there'd be people who vote against it simply because they didn't like this bit or they didn't like that bit. And you know what happens if you don't get a result like that? You end up leaving without a deal, which just about everybody, I think, regards as being unsatisfactory.
Let's bring Polly Ernest in on this. Polly, you came all the way from Hereford with your 5 children to protest. What were you protesting about, and do you think it could make any difference?
Well, I certainly hope it can make a difference. I came from Hereford with 2 of my children, 3 of my grown-up children. 1 flew in from Berlin. My husband has never been on a protest march before. He's a Londoner. He came with us. And 2 of my children came up from Bristol with their partners. So what was I hoping to achieve? Nobody's listening to us. We've been ignored. So if after the referendum result there had been this, gosh, that was a bit close, wasn't it? And we need to bring everybody together and try and find a way through this. Instead of which we were branded citizens of nowhere. Ian Duncan Smith said we were all leavers now. That we were supposed to have disappeared, and we haven't. And we've actually, although definitely over 700,000 people came out at the weekend.
How do you know? Did you count them all, Polly?
No, but I stood on the... I couldn't talk across Edwina, so I don't know why she's able to talk across me. I stood on the side of the road. I was at the front by the Hilton, and it took over 2.5 hours for the march to go past. Now, I have been on, this is, I think, my 5th anti-Brexit march that I've been on, and this was by far the largest. It was absolutely enormous. The other thing is, for a bunch of Ramonas, we aren't half a happy lot. It felt like a carnival. We're branded as sore losers. No, we're not. But we just want this vote to be ratified. We want to know that people definitely want what they were and that they are getting what they were promised. We were promised exactly the same benefits. We were promised the easiest deal in history. We were promised £350 million for the NHS. Now, I campaign regularly on the streets in Hereford, and people come up to me and they tell me that they've changed their mind. They tell me that they voted because they thought the NHS needed the money. And so I went to represent all of those. So not only did I go with all of my family and my family's partners, but I carried a banner. And on that banner, I had over 250 names, including my 87-year-old mother and my 85-year-old father, who value peace and value the peace that the EU, and by working closely with our partners, has brought about. So we were ignored.
All right, Edwina, so the idea of not wanting to be ignored and also feeling that the result was so close and people now want to change their minds. And Polly says 700,000 people, didn't count them all individually, but the general impression was an enormous morass of people who want to have a say at this point.
We had a vote.
And what have another one?
Oh, you can have lots and lots and lots of votes. And all that means
is... This was the second vote. We had a vote.
Polly, you just chided me for speaking over you, and I stopped. We had a vote. We had a huge vote. It was the biggest vote this country has ever seen. 33 million people voting, and 17.4 million, I think it was, who voted to leave. That's the largest vote that any single proposition or party has ever had in this country. That was the time to have the debate. That was the time when we did have the debate. And whatever people feel about regrets now, the fact is that the The Remainers, we were on the losing side. Our obligation now is to put that vote into effect and to make sure that we carry through our democracy. If we go on having referenda, and some countries do all the time, then you end up with nothing ever being decided in the country in a constant ferment of division and disagreement. That is not a way forward for your children, for your mother, or for anybody else.
What do you make of that, Polly?
Well, I just don't agree, because we had a referendum in the 70s, and that one had an overwhelming majority. This did not have an overwhelming majority. This is massive, massive constitutional change and upheaval. It means that I'm in
with either of those.
Well, in Herefordshire, we can't get the fruit picked. I live in an area that was left behind. Why not? Because people don't want to come. There aren't enough people coming into the NHS. We've got vacancies for nurses. Not enough people want to come. We've made this country toxic. We've made it so that we don't...
With respect, Polly, that is a recipe for endless inward migration. That is not the solution to any of our problems. It doesn't take care of the fact that an awful lot of people still feel that their wages are being held low because of inward... Well, I'm an economist. Well, that's how they feel.
But it doesn't matter, it's not true. You can't just do this on how people feel. And this was an advisory referendum.
You're telling me how you feel.
But
What's wrong with how you feel?
This was an advisory referendum. Any grown-up
Everybody
democracy,
said that they would respect the result.
But that's not what was in the parliamentary bill.
No, and neither was having a minimum percentage turnout or having a minimum percentage result.
No, that was because it was an advisory referendum. And if you check Hansard, you'll find that the reason why there wasn't a super majority put on it, and the reason why people were excluded, like people outside of this country who didn't have a vote.
All right, thank you very much indeed. My grateful thanks to you both. Thank you very much indeed to Edwina Currie and also to Polly Ernest. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. The number 08000 288 291.